Hello and welcome to a bonus discussion of APA in our Advanced Statistical Techniques course. So rather than talking about one of the modules I've already talked about, I thought I'd take a step back, talk about something that will come in handy potentially in subsequent courses or even in this course. Hi John, thanks for joining.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Before I get started, any questions about any of the assignments or?
The only thought that I had was the way that we're doing the auto regression is just new to me. I've always used time series objects in R to do stuff like that, so
Yeah.
I don't see why this wouldn't work. So I'm doing it the way it was asked. It was just kind of strange to me, and some of the considerations that you know we've always had to take into account when doing autocorrelation type predictive models is whether or not the variance is static and that the whole checklist that you're familiar with, I'm sure. When we're doing the auto regression the way that we're doing it in this module, in module 5 rather, um, are we still bound by those same considerations?
I mean, the short answer is probably not. It's the way that it's being done in this course is interesting.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
so, what I talked about it in the last whenever I
hmm
talked about this module. Let me see if I lost probably
I
closed.
think you made the comment that they're taking it easy on us, and
Yeah,
in
it's
some ways, yeah.
yeah. You should really be using the. I closed up my window, so I lost my browser session. But basically, the gist of it is they're computing lag for you, right?
Yeah.
Um, rather than letting you figure out how to do that. If you wanted to do it the way it's being done, you
Well,
would do some panda massaging, right? Um,
yeah.
uh, but it does get across the point, though, not to be terribly critical of it, that
Yeah.
you're doing analysis of data based upon previous values, and you do this because that's what you have to do, right?
Yep.
Um, and so the only thing I could say that would be pretty relevant is in big data technologies, the approach that you're seeing you might actually do because of
Yeah.
the scale, right? So uh,
Sure.
and you could computationally distribute it better because you can slice it and you can look at a given record and make a determination and blah blah blah, right? So, um,
Sure.
but yeah, it's kind of it's kind of reminiscent of the decision tree versus Bayesian network
hmm
in this course. Interesting concepts. The assignment, though, isn't necessarily aligning with the topic, but yeah,
Okay.
feel free to do it however you wish. If you want to do it in a more time series oriented approach, or if it's, I think the basic idea here is just to let you see the various types of statistical approaches that you might use, but not going terribly deep on any of them, right? Because you could, as I've
Yeah.
mentioned, we could talk all
You could have
term,
a whole class on this. Yeah.
yeah, about time series, and it actually would be a pretty interesting course. But um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's we wouldn't do it the way this is being done most likely, unless I've shown you how to do it in Spark, right? And then we might,
Yeah.
all right?
Yeah.
So
Well, it's the it's a definitely a new way to do it. So it was kind of cool.
yeah, when I think it's valid. It's not that it's
Yeah.
wrong, right? It's
Right.
just it's unusual to do auto regression and not use auto regress, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
but anyway,
Yeah.
it worked. I
Yeah.
I thought about spending the time to talk about how to do what is it, leap and lag in pandas, but if you were going to do it, you're going to probably use auto regress, right? Versus doing what they're doing, unless for some reason you really want to do it that way. But
Yeah.
um,
I'd put an ETS object in R or something like that. I like the STL time series decomposition a lot.
yeah,
I've used that at work a lot, and it's always treated me well. So
yeah,
I
yeah,
threw one of those in there, but I went ahead and did it the way it was as prescribed, and I thought it was cool. I didn't know. how different it really is than what's going on inside those other things.
Yeah.
Auto-regressive, um, ARIMA, auto-regressive, integrated moving average.
All right.
Um, there, it's just another tool in the toolbox, I guess, to do the same kind of thing, and it performed well,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
really complain about that.
Yeah. I used lag, that kind of concept in some streaming time series analysis.
Mm-hmm.
So there is kind of some value of being introduced to the concept, I think. Just it's a little
Oh, for
odd.
sure.
Yeah. Another one was odd to me is we don't talk about ANOVA, right? So analysis of
Yeah,
variance.
yeah.
I would have thought in a statistics course we'd have talked about that. But anyway, um,
I think
it's
that came up in the course like earlier in the curriculum. I want to
class
say it was in.
classification maybe.
I think it might have been, yeah.
Yeah.
It was one of the more recent ones.
Yeah.
Uh, I use dplyr, lead and lag,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I use those right in the regression models.
Yeah.
It was really cool. When I was trading steel, I built some models there, and one of the things that we figured out was um, there's a 3-month lag between the crude oil price getting above $70, and the industry reacting to that price by driving more steel into the ground to pull more oil out.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, and it was really cool because everybody thought there was a relationship. All the humans knew there was something going on, but the data was able to tell us just really like clockwork. 3 months, man. When you cross that money line and into the 70s and beyond, it's now worthwhile to keep the supply chain flowing by driving more steel into the ground to suck more oil out, whether it's
Be
fracking or otherwise.
conservative maybe
I
or
just think that's the speed the industry moves.
huh.
It's
That's,
it's just that, yeah, that slow.
yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it would make sense. You would want to make sure that it's not a blip, right? You wouldn't first day you don't go out and start drilling a hole, right?
Exactly.
So
Yeah,
interesting. That's cool stuff.
yeah, it was pretty.
Yeah, a time series course would be cool in the program too. I don't think there is one, but that'd be
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
So
Well, maybe the next advanced degree they put out there someday.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mentioned it if the opportunity presents itself. So I was going to talk about APA. If you're familiar with it, you don't have to hang out. But kind of give what I do, right? So that's one of the complaints, but also benefits of my doctorate was I became pretty good at it. And
Cool.
so if you're not all that familiar with it, it could come in handy, especially if you get into a course with a teacher that's really uptight about it.
Yep.
So I'll go
Yeah, I
ahead
think I'll
and
stick around because you've helped me a little bit get up to speed on 7th edition because I was doing 6th.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I'll just tear you up.
Okay, sounds good. I'll go ahead and hop into it. So first things first, where do you start? And the short answer is you want to go to guides.rasmussen.edu/APA and go to the 7th edition toolkit. And the thing you want to get there is the template. And you'll want to use the template for lots of reasons. First and foremost, it makes your life easier. So always use a template. I do. I for several reasons. You could do the exact same thing yourself as the template does for you, but it's going to take you some time to do it. I usually would take the template and at the beginning of each semester create a folder for each one of the courses I'm taking and copy the template into that folder and go ahead and adjust as it needs to be for that course if there is anything that needed adjusted, right? And then every time I'd write a paper, go in there, copy it, change the name, and then go in and edit the copy. So that's the general approach. So what's APA look like? This is interesting because Rasmussen selected to go with the student version of the APA template. There's two different styles out there. There's not a ton of difference. The key difference is the title page is different. So in APA Student Edition, you have a bunch more stuff on there, such as the course, the title name of the course, the professor's name with their title, so doctor if they're a doctorate, and then when the assignment's due and the title of the paper and so on, right? So the professional version just has the title of the paper, your name, and the organization you're affiliated with, but it does add in the upper left-hand corner a running head, all uppercase, minus the word running head. So all uppercase on all the pages. That's kind of a departure from 6 to 7. Is they removed the difference on the professional version between the title page and the rest of the pages. The first page of content for a student edition looks just like this. You have the title bold and centered. It should be exactly the same title as what's on the title page. It just repeats. Then you have page number, upper right hand corner, and then you start off with an introductory paragraph. You don't have to use the word introduction because we know the first paragraph after the title and the first page of content is the introduction. Your introduction should include things like a thesis statement, which is basically just saying what's the point of the paper. Then if you have headings, you would center them bold as well below. Some people make the mistake of going from the title being centered, which is appropriate, and then they switch down to heading level 2 for some reason and take it over to the left side, and it's inappropriate. It's not correct. Your references page, last page on its own page, so there's a page break before references, and it looks a bit like that, and minus my cursor that got memorialized forever in the screenshot. Sometimes you'll have to do an abstract, but most of the time you don't. The reason being, well, first of all, abstracts are hard, and they're hard to get right, although sometimes you'll have to do them even then. But part of it is also because of the type of work that most of the time is being done. It doesn't suit itself well to an abstract because most of the time at best you're doing a literature review for a lot of papers. You're not actually doing unique research. In a data science class, you could, if you were to do an abstract, it is not a summary of the paper per se. It's not the introduction. It is just in a very generic way explaining what's the thesis statement, the point of the paper, the topics that you talked about or will talk about, and the conclusion or the summary or the results of the research summarized in a way that where you could read the abstract. A well-written abstract, if you read it, it's like the cliff notes of the paper, right? It's more than just an introductory paragraph. It's more than just the conclusion. It literally is a summarization sort of the entire thing in a very concise way. And because of that, it's kind of hard to write. And it takes time to do it, and you have to write several of them to get pretty good at it. Frankly, I consider myself okay at it. I don't know that I ever get it quite right, though. And I don't know that most people do. It is one paragraph. It's generally under like 250 words. There's no indentation. That's the only thing that's a bit different with it. But again, ask before you do it, because if you can, you want to avoid it. A common pattern in writing in general, and certainly in scholarly writing, is the introduction, then there's some content, and then there's the conclusion. And that's a reoccurring sort of theme. It applies to the entire paper, so you should have something that introduces the material in the paper. Then you talk about the stuff, right? And then you wrap it up with a conclusion. It also applies within sections of the paper. So if you have a heading, level 1, where you've got a big topic thing, so maybe you've got 3 or 4 topics that you're writing about, you do that same thing inside of the section. You essentially introduce the section of what is this section about. Then you talk about the body of that section, and then you prepare the reader either for the conclusion or the next section. So you wrap it up, right? It also applies at a paragraph level even. We call that introduction the topic sentence. Then you introduce what we talk about as being evidence and analysis, and then you kind of wrap it up and move on to the next topic. So it's very much a recursive sort of pattern. A thesis statement is essential. It's the first thing you start with, and it's probably the thing that people get wrong the most. You should give the reader a hint of what it is as well. Sometimes you'll see it start with the purpose of this paper is, or this paper discusses, or this research centers on. You basically give the reader, hey, dummy, here's the thesis statement. Literally, that's kind of how you approach it. And the topics that support that are the subtopics. That's how you address the thesis statement. And then without it, it's kind of hard to do the whole thing because it's the scaffolding that holds it all together. You generally turn those subtopics into headings in your paper, or at very least they become essentially paragraphs for each one of the things you want to talk about. but oftentimes they are heading level ones from an organizational perspective. When you're doing an assignment, make sure you get all parts of the assignment. That's stating the obvious, but it's amazing how many times I see partial submissions. So the two things that you want to do in general with assignments is take a look at the instructions and also take a look at the rubric, because the rubric and the instructions together are telling you exactly what needs to be delivered. And probably if there's a question of that, you go by the rubric. I mean, obviously you'd raise it to the instructor, but as a general rule, write to the rubric, do the assignments to the rubric, because that's how they're going to be graded. It took me a while to figure that out because, I'm old, and when I went to school, we didn't do rubrics. There was some magic answer in the instructor's head. We had no idea how we were going to be graded. Certainly didn't know it ahead of time. Now it gives you, it's the secret decoder ring, right? It lets you know exactly what somebody's looking for. So the general approach is you get your thesis statement first. If you get it solid and you figure out what's the subheadings that you're going to support that with, you turn those essentially into heading level ones in your paper. You make sure you have an introductory section, make sure you have a conclusion section, and then as always, if you make a claim that's beyond something that you're either deriving or arguing, make sure you have a citation. Otherwise, you're getting into the realm of either unsubstantiated opinions or worship plagiarism. And generally speaking, you only cite on the first use of a source. You only need to cite again on a new paragraph. Within a given paragraph, you don't want to cite more than once unless you have more than one source and there's some confusion as to who something should be attributed to. That's the whole point of a citation, is for attribution. So you want to make sure that the right author gets credit for the right ideas. An example, imagine that you're asked to write 300 to 400 words discussing IT security policy implementations. Yes, it would be really exciting. I know, because I've had to read literally hundreds of those kind of papers. You're also told to define the concepts and provide its major elements. Then you're asked to describe the importance and include any challenges that might be faced during implementation, and you're supposed to have 3 scholarly sources. For me, the way I write, 3 would be on the low end. I'd probably end up with 8 to 10. Just because of the type of writing I typically do. So a possible thesis statement, and maybe not the strongest one, but it would fly, and it would probably get you an A or a B, is IT security policy implementation, shouldn't probably be capitalized, will be defined and explored, including challenges faced during adoption. Kind of did 2 things there. I kind of actually threw in the subtopics at the same time. I'd probably flesh that out a little bit more. A possible outline looks like the one that's on the screen. Start with an introduction, talk a bit about the definitions and major elements, why does it matter, so the importance, some of the challenges that are being faced during, and then the conclusion. And then I would probably start figuring out, what am I going to call this? Don't call it paper number 3 or something. It should be a descriptive title. So a possible sort of cover page, overview of information security implementation, not bad, probably good enough. There's no running head. There is a page number, upper right hand corner. Then the student's name, so that's your name, the organization you're affiliated with, in that case Rasmussen University, and then the course code and the title written out in reasonable ways, and then the instructor's name and title, and then the date written out as it is there. So long form, not 10/25 or something, but written out nicely. And again, this is the way you do it with the student edition of the APA template. Then your content, make sure that the title repeats on the first page of content. Everything is going to be left justified with a special indentation on the first line. So each paragraph, the first line has an indentation of half of an inch, and also everything should be double spaced. And you don't need the introduction heading. So it would look something like this. This is taking a template and stubbing it out. This is literally how I approach most of these kind of assignments. I get my title on there. I get my put some notes in that tell me, okay, here's where the introduction goes, here's where the definitions go, and so on, and get it to where I take a look at that. And if I do it right and the template is a pretty good one, I can also look at the Word, Microsoft Word's outline, and see what it looks like from an outline perspective. Something like this is about what I would do. I would probably skip making a proper outline to start with and just go straight to writing the paper. Especially 300 to 400 words is pretty short. Your next step is to go do some research. And a lot of times the hard part is coming up with what's the magic words. Because once you find those magic words, You can usually find the topic. It's knowing what something is called. So the right name for things, as stupid as it is, that's what you spend a lot of time figuring out what it should be. You generally want publications that are less than 5 years old. There are exceptions. If the publication you're citing is the seminal source, meaning it is the first time somebody wrote about something. So if you were to cite something that is talking about the first time something was ever done, it's appropriate for it to be more than 5 years old because that is the first time, right? It makes total sense. So if you're talking about MapReduce and you want to cite the Google paper, then that's what you would do. Or if you're talking about some form of statistical analysis and you happen to can find the first time that the person that created it wrote about it, then you would cite that paper. And basically you do this process over and over again until you fill out your paper. You find a source, you read the abstract, you read the conclusion, you read the introduction, and then you kind of skim through cherry picking the stuff and so on. The key thing is you rarely read a research paper from start to finish. Some people may. If it's a really riveting paper, I might. If it's something that I know I need to understand all of it, I might. But generally speaking, once you become familiar with the topic, you can read the abstract. Then I oftentimes will jump to the conclusion and findings to see what did they say. Primarily because that's what you should be citing in a paper, is the work that is unique to that paper, not citing something they cited. So if during their literature review they talk about something and they cite some other source, you can't cite the paper that you're reading. You need to go to that original source and read it and cite it. Otherwise it's a secondary citation. It's not a good thing. It's not horrible. People do it, but it's not really the right way. So that's something to keep in mind. Whenever you're going through this process, it's all about filtering. It's about getting rid of those that don't really make sense or aren't good. So you do things like, if there's a typo in a paper, I'm probably going to discard it, right? Unless it's something the teacher said, hey, you have to use this source, I'm going to pitch it, right? Because it tells me it didn't go through a proper peer review process. It probably isn't a very good paper. Not just because somebody makes typos. I make typos all the time, right? But I also run Grammarly on them to find those typos. I also, if something I'm writing is getting published, the people that are reading it are going to find those as well and make me fix them before they publish it, right? In addition to any kind of fundamental issues that are going on inside of the paper as far as my methodology or if my findings are total lunacy or not, or if they're supported by it, right? So paragraphs are a really important thing. Sometimes we kind of overlook them, but it's literally the building blocks of your paper. And sometimes it's much easier to write a paragraph than it is, say 10 paragraphs than it is to write 500 words, right? So because you just think of it differently. When you're writing a paragraph, the first sentence is essentially the topic sentence. It is the point of the paragraph. A person should be able to read the first paragraph or the first sentence of every paragraph in your paper and have a pretty good idea what it is you're talking about, because you're not writing mystery novels, you're writing scholarly works. You'll also have a concluding sentence of the paragraph that basically pulls it together and prepares the reader for the next paragraph. And in between those two things, you're going to present some evidence and you're going to do some analysis. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And obviously support any claims you make with a citation on the first sentence where you are using some other source. So you definitely care about paragraphs because 10 paragraphs might be easier to write than 1,000 words, right? That's what it comes down to. A paragraph is roughly 100 words. So 10 paragraphs into 1,000 words. It's also a logical unit of organization. You can move paragraphs around sometimes depending on how you write them, but it is the heart of the paper. And so making sure that there is one overlying idea in the entire paragraph is important. They need to be distinct and succinct and only deal with one thing that you're dealing with. When we talk about rules of writing sentences that are inside of your paragraphs, it's all about clarity and precision. It's about being as explicit as possible. That's why you avoid things like it, this, they, them, you, we, your, and so on, because who are they, right? What is it? What is this? And in fact, you'll oftentimes See, in Grammarly, unclear antecedent if you use this, if you don't say what this is. So this idea, this concept, this phenomena, those are ways that you disambiguate. So you can use the word this, you just don't use this by itself. Avoiding we is always a good idea unless you're co-authoring, right? Don't use an editorial we. You'll see that sometimes. APA 7th actually embraces first person when it's appropriate. So you can say I did this, right? So I administered a survey to 100 college students rather than saying it's just miraculously occurred, which is how I had to write my dissertation. You know, a survey was administered to 100 college students. It just happened, right? So that's the whole point of first person, is you can get into active voice and be explicit about who's doing what. Don't use contractions. So write it out. Do not use contractions. And part of that is because there's ambiguity sometimes between contractions, so it's better to be precise. And a sentence should be a single thought, and a paragraph should be a single concept that are all related together. And definitely use Grammarly. It'll help you write better over time. A paragraph should contain one idea. They're generally 3 to 5 sentences. There are exceptions, but the reason I say 3, you should have the topic sentence. That's the first sentence. You should present some evidence, and then you should wrap it up, right? 3 is on the short side. Although per APA, you can have a one-sentence paragraph, a one-sentence paragraph, but it should be done very carefully, and typically it's to make a point, right? You're trying to use power by using fewer words when you do that. So generally speaking, 3 to 5. You get much beyond 5, you're probably crossing the line between one idea. You're probably commingling ideas, or you're getting on a roll. And I occasionally see some papers where it's like a page and a half, right? One paragraph crossing a page and a half. That can't be a single idea, right? So if anything, try to keep them concise and short and to the point. And the meal plan will help. What's the meal plan? This came out of Duke University. It stands for the main idea. That's your topic sentence, evidence that you present, analysis that you conduct on that evidence, and then you lead out to the next paragraph. So the main idea, it's the topic sentence. It should be quite clear what you're writing. This isn't mysteries. This isn't fiction. You're making it to where the reader knows exactly what you're trying to say in that paragraph. They read the topic sentence, they should know exactly what the point of this is. They may want to see how you got there and if you can defend your position, but that is the point. Sometimes there's a citation on that first sentence, sometimes there's not. It really depends on if you're making a claim that has the need of support. So if you're saying something that you only know because of a source, then you probably want to put a citation on it. There's some people that argue and say it always should be on the second sentence. If you're making a claim, you should support the claim. That's my position. Evidence and analysis. So after you've made your claim in the topic sentence of what it is the point that you're going to make in that paragraph, you present some evidence. You do so by having information that includes a citation. And an analysis is not your opinion. It's showing a logical argument of how that evidence relates to the claim you're making. So it is about synthesis and about rational argument, not about because I said so, right? So it's making sure that things fit together and that you're showing how it all relates to that topic sentence. And then you link and lead out. That's where you tie it all together. And generally speaking, you want to hook it into the next paragraph if you can. And you also want to remind the reader kind of why you're saying what you're saying. And frankly, this is probably the hardest part to get right. And it's one where I continue to struggle because there's a tendency to make your topic sentence, get that part right usually. Then you put your evidence and analysis, and then you just charge ahead to that next paragraph, right? Rather than kind of wrapping it up, putting a bow on it and moving on. So that's something that we always, I guess that's another thing to consider as a writer of any sort. Whenever you're writing, if you're getting feedback, you will get better. And if that feedback's coming from you of reading your own stuff and deciding how good is this, you can improve over time. And it's a skill like every other skill. It gets better with practice. So that's where something like Grammarly can help. It can identify a lot of things that you need to work on. Having an editor and somebody giving you feedback can also help as well. When you're evaluating a paragraph, how do you know if it's good or not? Well, can you tell what the point is? could you read the first sentence of every sentence in your paragraph, in your paper, and understand what the point is? If you can't, it's probably not great. But maybe there's be some gaps, and that's where the evidence and analysis comes together of how can you support that claim. But you should have a sense of what is the point, right, by having read that. And at the end of the paragraph, do you have a sense of what's coming in the next paragraph? If you have no idea at the point you finish reading a paragraph what's coming next, probably that tie in and lead to the next one is needing a little help. So what you shouldn't do is copy a paragraph from some source, use Microsoft Word's synonym replacement feature of going through right-click synonym, pick another word, not cite it, and basically present it as your own work, because that's plagiarism. So an example of that, of what not to do, and I see this not so much at this university, but I do still see it in various other places, is taking something and then going through, picking some random words like appropriation versus adoption, or theft and book, publication and book might be synonyms, but not in this context, right? So that's one of the reasons to not do it, is the reader's going to notice. It's whenever you run across those, when I first saw this, I assumed it had to be a language translation issue, that the person writing it was, because English wasn't their first language. Then I learned what the trick was. It's all about trying to get past the plagiarism detection software, right? But the reader's going to notice, if you actually sit and read a paper that has that done, you really can tell it is theft and academic dishonesty. It's certainly not acceptable at graduate level. It's not, frankly, acceptable at any kind of college level. It's not your thoughts is the key concept. You're basically stealing someone else's opinions and ideas and expressing them as your own. And if you're caught, you fail. These are some pretty decent places to learn about paragraph writing resources. Walden is pretty good. The Duke Meal Plan is a great idea. Some tips and hints. Generally speaking, reference management you don't want to do by hand. Zotero is a pretty good free alternative to utilize. EndNotes is obviously, it's a better tool. There's other tools like EndNote. What these things let you do is essentially add a reference to your own library and then be able to insert it into Word on the fly. So I'll go ahead and pull up my EndNote instance here and show you what it looks like, assuming Windows 11 lets me do this, because it's still getting finished. All right, so this is what EndNote looks like. Not the most compelling thing you'll ever see, but you'll notice it supports this concept of groups, so you can go out and organize things by group. You can also do things like attach to your reference the document itself. So if I want to take a look at this particular reference, I can go and open it up and then actually read the paper itself inside of this tool, including things like I can highlight if I'm so inclined with a little highlighter if there's something I want to call out. And then also I can add notes in here as far as researcher notes, and it's possible also to create an annotated bibliography from this, something that could come in handy later on in your academic journey depending upon where you're headed. An important thing though is that if I have Word open, and so I'll bring Microsoft Word, especially if I were doing this in a template, which I don't have right now. And again, that's just really creepy. All right, so some text, and then down here I'd have references with a page break and probably bold and centered, and up a little bit. Oops, too far. Anyway, and then get on a new line below, and so down here, go ahead and take it to the left. And then so this, I can basically insert a citation going over into EndNote, clicking on the one I want, and then hitting this insert citation, and it sticks it in the right way based upon the number of authors, the number of the year, all that good stuff, and then puts it in here correctly, assuming it's in EndNote correctly, including the right format. So that comes in real handy when you're writing with a lot of sources. So something else to kind of keep in mind. Zotero does something similar. Not quite as nice, but worth the price. And that's a couple $100. So depending upon what you're doing, you might buy it, you might not. Microsoft Word has built-in reference capability of doing citations. I don't think they've updated to 7 yet, APA 7. Also, it's not very good. So you're better off probably using Zotero if you're going to do reference tracking. Zotero has the same sort of capability of attaching PDFs to your references, inserting them into Word, all that good stuff. Both of them can import from things like Google Scholar or libraries. You'll notice that most of those places have things like RIS or /endnote exports. So it is something to take a look at, because you still have to double check them. It's like everything else. If it's wrong inside of their tool, it's going to be wrong inside of your paper. So you'll have to verify that it is done correctly, but it does make life a little easier. You can also rate things inside of EndNote. So I can go through and decide if something is how many stars. So if I think it's really great, I can give it 4 stars. As well, I can make notes to myself inside of it. And you can find things as well. So you may even add your own keywords. And more importantly, I can go out here and do a text search across all of them. And it actually takes a look at not just the tags you can see, but actually the text of the document. So if there's something that you wanted to be able to find that contains certain words, this particular one's not all that great example, it's great for that too. What happens a lot when you do a lot of research is you run across an article you think is really great. You want to make sure you keep track of it, and then you don't. And then you can't find it again, and you spend a lot of time trying to track it down. Using things like a tool like EndNote can make sure that doesn't happen, or Zotero, either one. The next step is going through and creating heading level 1s. I already kind of showed you that to you. Don't do the introduction heading, because we know what's after the title is introduction, and then put a title on the first page. Again, use that APA template. It'll make your life easier. This is what Google Scholar looks like. And what happens, you go in, you search for stuff in Google Scholar. It's like Google, but scholarly in nature, supposedly, although you still have to make sure that what's in there truly is scholarly. You search for something that you want. You click on the double quotes below it. It'll pop up this page asking, what do you want it to cite? That's what the quotations are. You select EndNote. That'll download an RS that you can then pull into EndNote or Zotero. They both read the same files. So generally speaking, again, the steps I go through: review the abstract, take a look at the conclusion. If it's still good, I keep going and maybe look in, but only cite what's new to that paper. Don't cite secondary sources. So don't cite the literature review. Instead, it's perfectly fair to if they cited 5 articles, to go look at those 5 articles and maybe you cite them. It's a reasonable thing to do. Here's an example of a paper that matched our search criteria. Notice that the abstract includes a pretty decent thesis statement. This paper, that's a good clue, right? So anytime you start with this paper, you're giving the reader a hint as to either the topic or the results that came out. So a definite good thing. It's not a bad source. Then jump down to the conclusion. They restate the thesis statement and the focus of their research and so on. So again, inside of tools like Zotero or EndNote, you can do the highlighting just like I've done here. Makes it easy when you come back in, if you like highlighting your textbook way back when, right? So you can find the things that were interesting. Once you've read enough that you can use that source, you can write the paragraph that goes with it. In this case, I cited on the first sentence, and I actually did kind of lead out on the last sentence. You can see that I'm probably going to talk about maybe monitoring more, right? That would be where I would think that's going to go, but it's hard to say. Generally speaking, avoid citation or avoid quotations. If you quote, make sure you do it the right way. There are rules about it, and it depends upon the length of the thing that you're quoting. Oftentimes it includes either the page number or paragraph, but if it's over a certain length, you've got to indent it and do it as a block quote. Make sure you define any acronyms on their first use. Generally speaking, you only have to do it once in the paper, though, so don't do it each time you say IT. But the exception to that might be if you have something with chapters, you might want to do it in each chapter. And then after you do that, I generally go write the introduction of basically stating what is the thesis statement, what are the headings I'm going to talk about, and then that's literally the introduction. You're saying, this is the thesis statement, and here's the stuff I'm going to talk about, and then you're done. You might introduce some additional facts to get the reader engaged. You might throw in some statistics of making sure they understand the importance, but it's about setting context and setting expectations and giving them the roadmap to the paper. Then you go down and do basically the same thing in the conclusion. I typically write it in past tense. Restate the thesis statement of saying, here's what I said I was going to tell you, right? And then you say, essentially, this is how I told you what I was going to tell you. And so the example, it's not going to win a Pulitzer Prize, but it's not bad. And it's probably an A paper. And with that, I'll wrap it up and see if there's any questions.
Nope, that's all good. Thank you.
Sure thing.
Sure
And
thing.
thanks, as always, for joining. It's nice to have somebody in the room.
Yep.
If you have any challenges with anything, let me know. That's what I'm here for. And same thing for you, Eric. If you struggle with anything, let me know. So otherwise, I guess stay safe. Have a good evening. We'll talk again on Thursday.
You too. Take
All
care.
right, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.